edition of Big Picture, we will analyze the proposed IAS Cadre rules and the changes that the government is mulling at this point in time. Joining me on the program today are S. Lakshmi Narayanan, former Home Secretary, Government of India, and N.C. Saxena, former Chairman, Planning Commission. Thank you to both my guests for joining me on this edition of Big Picture. Mr. Saxena, let me start the program with you first. Let's first hear your thoughts on these proposed IAS Cadre rule changes. What do you think of them? Good, bad, ugly?
Well, in fact, my sympathies are with Government of India, because what has happened is that in the past, say, 20, 30 years, although Government of India has also been at fault by reducing the intake in the IAS, they thought that because of liberalization, we won't require IAS officers. But the reverse happened. With more revenues, Government of India expanded its role in education, health, agriculture, also in new departments, telecommunications, transport, climate change, etc. So the requirement increased. It also increased because the age at which recruitment takes place also was increased from 24 to 30. So people have less years to serve. But recruitment did not increase to that extent. So that is the medium-term solution. We need to increase recruitment. But at the same time, let's not forget that the states are not that much in short supply of IAS officers, as they are saying. If you look at UP, in UP today, there are 18 officers in the rank of Chief Secretary. But there's only one Chief Secretary. Other 17 are drawing the salary, but someone is in charge of Raj Bhasha, someone is in charge of some small corporation, someone is in charge of protocol, and so on and so forth. And states do it deliberately so that these officers keep on running after politicians. Hey, please give me some important post. So a large number of redundant posts have been created in the states. And that is the reason why don't have shortage. Government of India has the shortage, and Government of India, you find that today, because IAS officers are not available, so in the Ministry of Tribal Affairs, someone from Ordnance Factory is working. In the Ministry of Health, someone from Railway Traffic Service is working, which is not good. At the same time, let me also say that the proposals from Government of India are a bit harsh, and they need to be diluted. What I'm proposing, in fact, I published a paper in the Wire recently on this. What I have proposed is twofold. Number one, Government of India should reduce the central deputation reserve from, say, 40% to 15%, and gradually increase it 15, 20, 25, and so on and so forth. Because today you find that from Tamil Nadu, that the total cadre strength is about 320. But only 12 officers in Government of India, out of which 11 are in Joint Secretary and above, and only one is in the rank of Deputy Secretary, Director, etc. West Bengal government has not sent a single officer to Government of India in the last 2 years. So states are in a way turning the IAS service as a state service. IAS should neither be the state service nor become a central service, which Government of India is intending to do. It should remain all India service, which means what I'm proposing is that you reduce the 40% to 15%. Government, if states government should get this sanction, approval of this junior officers, but in case it doesn't go up to 15%, then send those officers who have put in 7, 8, 9 years of service to Government of India, even without their will. Today, what happens is these officers, they prefer the perks in the state government. They have a big car, they have a big house and orderlies, etc. When they go to Government of India as the Deputy Secretary, these facilities are not there. So against their will, we should send junior officers to Government of India, number one. Secondly, in case Government of India wants any particular officer from government, state government, who is an authority, say in disaster management or some other subject, then what they are proposing is that we should just take that officer without the approval of the state government or the officer concerned. What I'm saying is in such exceptional cases, which should be restricted to just 1% of the cadre, the approval of the officer concerned should be necessary. So you cannot take an officer without ignoring both the state government and the officer concerned. You take the approval of that officer and then take him as an expert. That is okay. So with some modifications, I think we should try to see that the all India character of the IAS is maintained, which means that today you find about 60–70% officers never go to Government of India. They remain state service. They get all those complexes, or they have no desire to learn, and they end up as deadwoods, which is not good. So there should be some change, but on the whole, one should encourage more people to go to Government of India.
Absolutely, absolutely. Let me also welcome on the program right now, Vinita Hariharan will be joining us now. She is a public policy expert. But before she comes on board, let me take on Mr. Subramanian Lakshminarayanan as well into the picture. Mr. Lakshminarayanan, as far as this particular proposed change is concerned, how would you look at it? What are your thoughts? You're someone who's served at the highest level in the country, looked at all these things very closely, served at the state level, and as the Home Secretary of this country as well. So what are your thoughts on this?
Sir, I very much, I'm much junior to him, but I very much respect, and I also totally endorse whatever Mr. Saxena has suggested. IAS cannot be either reduced as a central government service, or it should not be reduced even as just a state government service. They must have the exposure both in the state government as well as in the central government. Actually, what has now created this situation is, as Mr. Saxena had very aptly summarized, the government is having a very peculiar situation where a forest officer is in charge of as a director of internal security, and a postal service officer is in charge of an infrastructure department of roadways. These are all no connection whatsoever. It is just, of course, partially the demand of other services that, we should have same representation, this, that. While I'm not anyway for any hegemony of the IAS, but certainly the IAS has a much better exposure because of their state government experience, because of their expertise as a collector, and because they have served in various departments of the state government. And the present situation is rather pitiable that I know, because having been in the Ministry of Home Affairs, there are fellows who are from the Forest Service looking after internal security when they have not been able to provide even security to the animals within the forest. Now, it's a very ridiculous state of affairs. And to have a military lands and cantonment service officer on deputation with an infrastructure ministry and all that, all this is, whatever is happening is partly creation of Government of India, because initially they tried to succumb to the pressures of the other services, and now they realize, and many secretaries have told me themselves who are serving now, that it has become a horrendous experience for them, because you see, the pivotal post is the joint secretary. But many of them, because they have got no empanelment as joint secretary and all that from other services, the secretary feels helpless, because even the joint secretary has to be taught what needs to be done and what has to be done, because they have no experience, no exposure whatsoever. So, as Mr. Saxena correctly said, we have to pity the Government of India. But at the same time, this is not the solution that, straight away you say that we have all the powers and state government has no power to refuse and all that. I think it is advisable that the Prime Minister or the personnel minister talks to all the chief ministers. Frankly, if you ask me, neither the chief ministers nor the maybe the central powers may be too happy with the IAS, because IAS is supposed to be giving their independent views, which is always very unpleasant. In the state government, they prefer the state government promotees or the state civil service people. And in Government of India also, partially they thought that they will have an easy ride by getting a military land cantonment service chap or a postal service chap into an infrastructure ministry. But now they realize that it is going to be all chaos, which is already presently the situation. But at the same time, as I told you, even though the chief ministers are also not very happy with the IAS or their independence, they are now raising a big shindy just to show the prime minister down. That is also not correct. And also it is not correct that people who are corrupt, like it happened in the West Bengal, the police service officers, they refused to join, and the government of India looked very small. They issued an order that they should join the next day. And at the end of the day, till today, they have not joined. This is neither good for the morale of the service nor for the country's administration. So, as suggested by Mr. Saxena, I think the PM also should meet some distinguished civil servants like Mr. Saxena and others, try to understand and keep a balance. Maybe instead of 15%, it could be, instead of the present 40%, it could be 20%. And then the government should have at least some dialogue with them and then straight away introduce this. Because you can't certainly have all the states on board, but if at least more than 2/3 of the states are on board, I think it's a good reform. And Mr. Saxena very mildly put it. Also, many state government younger officers have got accustomed to all these perks of chaprasis and too many orderlies and people sort of taking care of their cows and all that in their huge bungalows. All this culture also should change. They should come to Government of India, try to live in a 2-bedroom apartment in Moti Bagh or a 3-bedroom apartment in Lakshmi Bai Nagar, and without any orderlies and all that, because this kind of their feeling that their big sides should end, and they should work as good civil servants and as good officers without expecting the state government perks here. Absolutely. So I think either both for the morale of the IAS and better discipline of the IAS, as well as for better administration of the country, as Mr. Saxena said, we should have at least 20% people who are coming on deputation, and the Government of India should be able to force it through. First, of course, they should talk. But all this thing of, interfering with federalism and this, that is all just a political issue is being made out before the elections. And as I told you, in the heart of hearts, no chief minister is also, I have been a secretary to chief minister in Madhya Pradesh. In fact, I have seen the chief minister many times disgusted, yaar, aapko bhi rakhe hue hain, aur tumhare sab afsar log milke mere ko dubane mein lage hue hain. Because every time, whatever I say, you never agree to whatever I'm suggesting, and every time you tell me and put me into fear, sir, isme ye musibat ho jayega, wo musibat ho jayega. So I had to sort of tell him, sir, we are paid for it. We have to tell you what is correct. It is for you to then take a political call. So I don't think even chief ministers are very, they are not in love with the IAS officers as they are now pretending from some of the opposition states. But all the same, I think in the interest of better governance, in the interest of the discipline of the service, the Government of India should have the power to requisition the services of some experts and other good officers. And at the same time, Government of India should not use this power to starve the state government of good officers.
Absolutely. Points very well taken. Let me take the discussion forward now with Vinita Hariharan. Vinita, as far as the states are concerned, this whole issue of cooperative federalism, like Mr. Lakshminarayanan just brought up, it seems to be the flavor of the moment. At least all the opposition states at least are talking about how the sovereignty of the respective states is being put down by the center. What is at the heart of this problem really as far as the states are concerned? Because you closely work with several of the states as well.
Right. See, there is something called, this is the Indian Administrative Services. So although I'm not an IAS officer, but if I'm correct, this is the Indian Administrative Services. So this is about serving the entire country. So it's not about serving only the states. So therefore, as an Indian Administrative Services officer, one has to be ready to serve in their states first initially. I mean, of course, the hierarchy is that you first get appointed as a subdivision collector, and then you become a collector of a district, and then you move on to various state roles, and then you move to the center. So the center is not really bypassing any of the hierarchies and asking for officers beyond what is already mandated. And as per the initial rules as well, what is said is that there is a certain number of allocation of officers for the central deputation services. I mean, Central Deputation Reserve, which actually the states are not really giving in those number of officers. So they're actually holding them on. It's between the the state political class as well as the state bureaucracy. I think there is a good nexus there, wherein, like Lakshmi Narayan ji just mentioned, they are very comfortable in their zones in the states, and definitely in the states there is a lot of autonomy for IAS officers, and they enjoy the kind of freedom that he just mentioned about the kind of luxuries and all of that. But apart from that, there is also autonomy of working in states. I think they have a lot more freedom to actually do things, because ultimately implementation happens in the states, and in the center what happens is actually the thinking process and the policy formulation, etc., which many of the IAS officers may not be very excited about doing, because it's their adrenaline comes from actually implementing and getting things executed. So unless you are in the Ministry of External Affairs or Ministry of Finance, where you actually do things which are pan-India, because otherwise most of the departments and ministries is about implementing centrally sponsored schemes or central sector schemes, wherein you have to actually drive the state governments to do their bit. And also, I think they look at a greater promotional, aspiration in states wherein they can move to a chief secretary position and then rule the entire state. So they would rather be a king of a small state than a nobody in a pan-India level. So I think that's also what drives the bureaucracy to stay in the states. But I think this is not an undue demand by the center, because what they're actually saying is give us the due allocation of officers, which is due to the center. So and the new rule also says that they will engage with the states, and they will do a kind of a negotiation process, and then if the states nothing comes out, then they say it's the center's discretion, I think, which is fair enough.
Points well taken. All right, taking the discussion forward now, Mr. Saxena, let me go back to a point that Mr. Lakshminarayan was making about breaking the impasse. How do we break the impasse at this point in time? Do you think that a meeting between the chief ministers of the states, and to start off with, the personnel minister can try and thrash out these issues, discuss them at large, and then come to some kind of a solution? Because at the end of the day, we'd like to see the states and the center on the same page on this issue.
Well, in fact, it is a very good suggestion that the minister in the government of India should call the ministers concerned from the states. If not at the level of Prime Minister, at least at the level of the ministers, there should be a meeting to sort out. But at the same time, Government of India must modify its recommendations. And the draft which has been prepared is very coercive. It forces the states that we will take officers without your consent, and we will take any officer we will like without your consent and the consent of the officer. Both need to change. You have to reduce the number from 40%. Today it is 40% to about 15%. And the state should, today the procedure is that the state will send only those names who are willing to go. That is not correct. The state must adhere to sending 15% of officers to the center, and must include junior officers even without their will. But at the same time, if Government of India wants an officer without the recommendation of the state government, then at least the officer must be willing, and this must be done only in exceptional cases. Now, let's also remember that according to our constitution, Government of India is not required to take the concurrence of the state governments. It can only consult. Consultation does not mean concurrence. So with the result, today it appears to me that only because the opposition state governments have opposed the proposal, it is quite likely that the Government of India will not call any meeting and will, after some time, just pass the law, which is very unfair. It should not happen that way. But as I said, that the state should also change how they treat the IAS officers. Let's not forget that Durga Shakti Nagpal was suspended because she was taking action against some Samajwadi Party leader who was doing sand mafia. So therefore, the states are also quite, coercive, or they are not very professional. The rules provide the cadre rules provide that each officer must serve for at least 2 years on their cadre post. It is not happening. In UP, I know IPS officers are getting transferred within 2 or 3 months. One IPS officer said, "Sir, अब तो हफ्ते की posting होती है, तो हफ्ता बनाते रहते हैं." हफ्ता बनाना, in police means you're taking your weekly bribes. So therefore, that is, the state should also try to professionalize its administration, and that's the only way out.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Let me bring in another aspect here. Mr. Lakshmanarayana, let's talk about this as well, because see, at some level, the states are also talking about a shortage of number of IAS officers. The center is also talking about the same thing. Do you believe that we should increase the number of IAS officers that we take in on a yearly basis? Because that too has come down gradually over the years.
Sir, 2-3 things. Mr. Saxena very correctly said in the beginning itself that the government of India made the mistake of reducing the intake. And then I won't call it a mistake because then I'll be attacked. But then now a chap at the age of 30 can also enter the IAS. Now, naturally, the way the system works, he should thank his stars if he becomes an additional secretary. I mean, I don't think even that is going to be easy for him. He will have to retire as a joint secretary, in spite of the fact that he might have made it to the IAS with good marks at the age of 30. So I think, anyway, now that can't be changed because there will be a hue and cry. So, I mean, already there are demands that it should be increased to 35 instead of the age of 30. Now, in any case, I think number of IAS officers, another miscalculation the government thought was that with liberalization, the number of IAS officers are not that much required. But the fact of the matter is that in a welfare state like ours, we have got so many schemes coming up and so many new problems coming up, like now COVID management. Now, I mean, you must have somebody like the government has constituted a big committee and all that. No, you must have the field experience of people. I mean, to expect that in the government of India, somebody from postal service will manage COVID management is not correct. This fellow should have had a district experience. He should understand what is COVID management, what is rural management. So I think the government of India should increase the recruitment because the challenges are growing day by day. And then there are more and more welfare schemes and other things coming up. Well, I am not against privatization and liberalization. All that should be done. But still, you will require good, competent officers who understand both the field level problems as well as the national level problems. But I agree with that Madam Harigaran, who suggested that a mountain is being made out of a molehill. There is nothing really all this thing, because all these opposition states, they are just using it as a handle to attack the Prime Minister. And maybe the government should have consulted them before. They have not done it. But as Mr. Saxena has suggested, the wire media would be just reduce that demand from 40% to a lower level, maybe 20, maybe 15, so that the hue and cry dies down, and then still make an attempt. There is no harm, if not the Prime Minister, if the personnel minister calls all the people who are dealing with the IAS or the cadre management. And even if the chief minister is holding most of these portfolios in most of the states, he will be having a minister of state or somebody who assists him, or at least the chief secretary can come, so that the government shows that it believes in federalism and they have consulted the state governments. And then maybe reduce the stringent number of 40% that they can do it to 20%. And I agree with Mr. Saxena that they can't sort of, against the will of officers, force people to come to Government of India. But at the same time, at the junior levels, the officers must be sent out to Government of India, so that this kind of, of course, things will fast change with more and more education and all that. The number of chaprasis and all that will come down, like already in a advanced state like Kerala and all that. Even if you tell a peon, you may have 4 peons in your house, but that peon won't do any personal work for you. But I come from a state of Madhya Pradesh and Uttar Pradesh and all that, where I have myself enjoyed all these perks that when you come back, some orderly will run to take off your shoes, and another orderly will take off your coat, and somebody will be holding off your your telephone. Those days, you didn't have mobile. So all this kind of things, perks should end. It is not good for a democracy. We are fast growing, and this kind of central postings where they don't get these perks will also level them and show them that, it's not their entitlement. They are all public servants and not public bosses.
Absolutely, absolutely. Vitaryan, coming back to you now, let's go back to a point that both the guests have made about how, too much is being made out of this by the states. But there is a fear as well, like Mr. Saxena said, that the government may just bulldoze its way through all of this, the central government, like it has done in a couple of things in the past. And that's a big worry and a big concern as far as the states are concerned, and that should not be done. Do you see that aspect being addressed?
So I think nothing works without consultation in this country today. There are initial consultations that are held, and even the clause, that the insertion that is mentioned talks about negotiation with states first. And if the states do not agree, and if there is no consensus arrived at, then the center would have the final say, is what the new rule insertion says. So I think that's very fair enough. And also taking on from what Lakshmi Narayanji just said, I think the entire bureaucracy and the IAS and the state IP, and before I come to that point, there's also something to be mentioned, that there's something called the state administrative services also. Like you have the Kashmir administrative services and the state UPSC. So there are a number of officers which the states can tap also from their state commissions beyond the IAS officers, so who are trained actually to serve that particular state. So I think that is another point to be noted. And then coming to my point of actually this entire system of bureaucracy, which is so draconian and complex web that has been created in India in the name of bureaucracy and the Indian administrative services, I think it's a colonial legacy. And it's high time that we revamp the entire system. And this government has taken some steps, baby steps, I would say, in lateral recruitment and in recruiting experts and professionals from the outside world and bringing in fresh blood into the system. I think it's really, really high time that we revamp the entire system and take cognizance of the needs on the ground. What is the role of the IAS officers to ensure effective implementation of centrally sponsored central schemes and also ensure law and order, all of that. I think all of that, the law and order part, the administrative part is taken care of well. But what about the implementation of schemes and all of that? And what about looking at, the meritocracy aspects in the IAS cadre itself? They get promotions every 5 years, despite what their performance is. The maximum punishment they get is just being suspended. Perhaps that is in the extreme cases. But there is no carrot and stick policy, and there is no incentive to perform. So I think there's really need to professionalize the IAS system and make it as competent as the management profession is in the outside world. And if you see the democracies such as the US of A also, they have a system of lateral entry, which I've also mentioned in a show last year, which you did on the reforms. So I think there is time that we have a kind of a very merit-based selection system after a certain stage. If people with adequate experience in the field, they want to join in serving the nation and in nation building, they should be selected through a very competitive process, as competitive as the IIM admission is. And then they be given some kind of exposure training and then be inducted into the nation building process through the administrative services. And I think it's time that we don't treat the IAS as such coveted officers and then give them such undue luxuries and comforts, which it's almost like a discrimination of sorts between the IAS and the rest of the civilization, so to speak. So I think it's time that we look at democratizing the entire system, and I hope that this government would do that while they are here.
Absolutely. Points
well,
very
madam,
well
your
taken.
point is well taken. What you people should understand, we have all come from the grassroots level. I'm an IAS officer who has served as a collector for 9 years. If you give, okay, we did some kind of a lateral entry in the government of India without any competitive exam, which I feel is not very correct. And number two, if the same powers the state chief minister start exerting, you will find a chap who is not even fit enough to be a clerk appointed as a collector. Because this is the kind of patronage system which is prevailing in this country, and you can't change the political thinking on this subject. Now, it is another point that this disease of lateral entry is not I mean, yes, have a lateral entry. I have no issue at all. Then ask all the IAM and all the management people to sit in a competitive exam, select the best. But it can't be that, I like this fellow, or he has got some RSS backing, and then this fellow has got some other BJP backing, and then sort of take him as a joint secretary. This is not advisable at all. Because if the same yardstick is applied in the state government, I told you a chap who is not fit enough to be a clerk, a low edition clerk will come away as a collector, and that day is not far off if this demand for this thing. There has been an established system which Sardar Patel and others have founded, that there must be a competitive exam. The Britishers also were taking it only by a competitive exam. The best are chosen. Okay, I agree with you that the kind of perks and all that, and this feeling of which I already said, this feeling of, there are people who are entitled for all this should go. Mr. Saxena has also said the same thing. Junior officers must be forced to come to Government of India, where you don't get any of these perks. But just pushing lateral entry without any competition and all that is going to be counterproductive over a period of time.
Absolutely. Points taken. And I think Vinita Ariana's point also is the same, that a process needs to be followed, a procedure needs to be taken in, and only then will the selection have to be done. Because like Mr. Lakshminarayanan said, we know if there is no procedure in the process, we all know what is going to happen really as far as appointments are concerned. And that's something that we don't want. That's the last thing that we want. So Mr. Saxena, closing comments from you, best way forward.
Well, in fact, I will just make 2 or 3 points here. One is that if you call a meeting at the level of the minister or the prime minister, it is quite likely that opposition-ruled states will take a political stand and will just oppose in order to get coverage in the press. So the meeting should first be called at the level of the secretary and call the chief secretaries. That is number one. And there has to be give and take between both. So Government of India must dilute its proposals. At the same time, it must put pressure on the states to send more officers to Government of India, so that the service remains all India service. It doesn't get reduced to state service. And other professional details, etc., which have been pointed out, are very good. We should reduce the age of recruitment from 30 to maybe 27 in gradually, make it 29, then 28. I know it will hit these the coaching centers very badly, but that is what is needed. After all, in our days, we were recruited at the age of 24. 24 was the maximum age. So that is something. And lastly, let's not forget that if lateral entry is done through UPSC, it would be quite fair. And in the past also, we recruited Vijay Kelkar, Montek, Manmohan Singh. They all did very well. In the last 2 years also, lateral entry has been done through UPSC. And so far, there has been no such complaint that they are all RSS or bhakts of Bajrang Dal, etc. There was no such complaint, at least to my mind.
Sir, the initial proposal of the Government of India was not through UPSC. There was a hue and cry.
Yes,
and
yes.
After that, he very reluctantly agreed for UPSC.
That's
so
right.
what I meant is, sir, that again there must be a competitive exam or something, so that you get the best in it. Yeah, and otherwise the same thing, sir, is stretched to the types of I don't want to name any CM, but some of these CMs are capable of recruiting third-rate riffraff as a collector and saying that isko main ye bana dunga, wo bana dunga, and lateral entry. So, there must be a system for this also. Absolutely. Lateral entry I'm not opposed to, but then even the lateral entry should be through a proper competitive exam, so that you get the best of talent. Otherwise, sir, the government will itself collapse. At least all said and done, nobody till today, no chief minister or no minister can push in his son or grandson without merit into the IAS. There has been a very fair system. And that system should be there even in lateral entry. That is all I meant, sir. Thank you.
Absolutely. Points very well taken. And I think that has to be done. At the end of the day, merit is what we need to reward, and we have to choose the best of the best. As like Mr. Lakshminarayanan always says, always choose the best, and that's the only way the country can go forward. So let's hope that we have a foolproof system where we can only select the best, and the country and the nation progresses in the right way. All right, we'll have to leave it at that. Thank you so much to all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.